Okay.
Okay. All right. Good morning, Ray. Thank you for spending your time with us this morning. I know you're very busy.
Yeah.
Um,
Great to
let
be
me.
here, and thanks for inviting me.
Yes. Well, the aim of this conversation is really to get to know our members more intimately. I guess we're all connected via LinkedIn, and sometimes we have events. But I think nothing beats a one-to-one, face-to-face actually conversation. But because of the pandemic, we are all forced to use Zoom. But I'm sure one day we'll meet each other in Hong Kong.
That would be
Hopefully
wonderful.
next year. Yeah. So we, in the interest of time, we have 30 minutes today. But it's always very difficult to compress your whole life story or about your business in the shortest time. It is like if you're asked to do a thesis and there is no limit in words, then you can write all the grandmother's story. But if you're asked, like, tell me about yourself in 2 minutes or 1 minute or even 30 seconds, like what most of the startups are asked to do, right? Give me an elevator pitch. And I was reading about your articles that you've written. Is a very interesting journey about yourself. So I would like to know a little bit about yourself. You were, in journalism, and then, you went on to do branding, and then now you are a startup founder. So maybe we could start with, a little bit
Once
about
upon a
yourself.
time,
Yes,
once
in 30
upon a time,
seconds.
there was a young boy with a dream. Well, it's
Okay.
interesting that you talk about the elevator pitch. What I
Hmm.
do now in working with my clients is talk
Mm-hmm.
about the one-word story. And the one-word story is really born out of this idea when I was a broadcast journalist, which I spent 11 years doing. Half
Mm-hmm.
of that time was in Canada, and then the other 5 years in Hong Kong. We talked about the idea of, can you sum up your story in one word? Or we called it a commitment. And a lot of times the commitment would be something like, boy meets girl, or um, overcoming adversity,
Mm-hmm.
man's inhumanity to man, government's inhumanity to man, sort of idea. And that idea of being a broadcast journalist and a storyteller and winning awards for telling very visual stories then transformed into what I'm doing now, in the sense that in the year 2000, I transferred that skill set to working for a big PR firm at the time, which was Hill and Knowlton in Hong Kong, where I was a broadcast journalist. And then what I did from there was we started the practice, which we then branded as crisis planning and training. And really the idea was to take that skill set that we had, thinking on your feet, being able to tell a story, being able to communicate uh, in person orally, which is a very different skill than, say, a writer would have, because you have to present your ideas, and you have to present those ideas in a very short time period and in a very short window, right? Like a very small window.
Yes.
So then we transferred that whole concept into a kind of preventative practice that focused on training, planning, and C-Suite Counsel. I took that idea with some friends to the other PR agency that I worked for, which was Edelman, and
Adam.
and based out of Hong Kong. But it was really very much a regional role. It was a very unique role in that there was a small group of us at that time who were involved in training, because we saw that very much as a specialization, that there would be the practice areas, and then there would be the sort of expert that would come in and do your trainings, who had the skill set that we and I have, which is the ability to think on your feet, the background in media, the background in visual storytelling, the ability to communicate that story in one word and build a structure around it. And then in the middle of 2018, I decided to change careers again and take that entire skill set of broadcast journalist and consultant and build my own company around it, which I branded as Epic Communications. And that, I think, is like the best of that, 25, 30-year career that I have in taking all those skills and making them much more accessible to CEOs, entrepreneurs, to companies and their mid-level and junior staff, in helping them to communicate their strengths more effectively, understand the risks of their company, prepare for events, What I'm about is like what they would call an insurance pre-loss. Yes, I do crisis response, but
Mm-hmm.
increasingly you want to avoid that because the recovery times and the costs are so incredible that you really want
Yep.
to work in preventing that, and training and planning and C-Suite Counsel and making that accessible is really
Right.
what Epic Communications is all about.
Well, interesting because I think the one of the challenges of most people face, whether they are in startup or they are C-suites or some even politicians, whenever they open their mouth, I'm not sure if
What
they,
goes in, right? That's the
yeah,
idea.
I'm not sure they actually process what they are about to speak. I guess to be able to give a good narrative on your feed, unless you prepared for it, right? But sometimes if you're in a conference or if you're in front of the media, you can't really anticipate what question that's gonna be thrown to you. So, like thinking on your feet, it's a skill. Is it a skill that we all can learn, or is a natural gift that you think some people are just faster, they process information, or they can actually assess the situation, right? Like the crowd. Which one do you think is it a
Well,
skills, a science, or
you always look at professional athletes, you look at professional musicians, and you
yes,
think, were they born with that skill or did they learn it? They obviously have to pick it up somehow. And
yes,
so, what I was able to do in my practice area is address those misconceptions that you brought up. The idea of they're not prepared for the questions. I totally disagree. As a CEO, as the head of your own business, or as the head of any kind of practice area, or your own responsibility, you should be able to sum that up in one word. For my company, Epic Communications is about expertise, it's about structure, it's about accessibility. And I think that those are skills that I work on with CEOs to get them to understand. Here's the thing. Everybody communicates. As a baby, when you're communicating, but are you an effective communicator?
it's
Is it
noise, right? Sometimes.
right? Are you making noise? And this is the thing where I talk about one of the biggest misconceptions is CEOs or startups or business people in general can't distinguish in their own minds the difference between their objectives and the story, right? The objective is to sell more product. The objective is to get more clients. But saying to trust me, I'm a lawyer isn't a credible story. You really have to look a little bit more into what the audience that you're looking at influencing is after. And I think that there's a skill set and a structure around that. And that's what I work on. And I do it in a very, because you're working with very smart people. You're
Yes.
just, a lot of times they're a bowl of spaghetti when it comes to telling their corporate story or their own, story of how they're going to influence, their key stakeholders. Increasingly, that audience for a lot of our viewers, I think, might be, access to capital. Like, how do you talk to an investment committee or a venture capitalist or a bank to say, I've got this great idea and trust me, it's gonna be great. That's not a great setup. I think you really need to understand what they're feeling and look at how to use the structures that I have perfected over 30 years of being a broadcast journalist and in consulting to be a little more focused in telling that story and making that difference. I'll give you an example. A great show to watch is The Dragon's Den. I don't know if you've ever seen that, where those
Yes.
entrepreneurs come in with this sort of idea, and you can see the ones that have real potential, but then often the dragons are like pulling the story out of them because they're not able to communicate it. And then there's others that are really great salespeople, but their ideas are awful. So you have to have not only a great communications story, but you also have to have the backing, the credibility, a credible product or service to offer. The two of
Yep.
those, I think, are
Yep.
critical.
Yeah, I think they both have to work hand in hand because if you have a lousy product and you're a super good salesman, then people perceive you as a con man because you can sell, but you're not selling a product with, integrity or but if most of the startup founders, especially, I've invested in mostly Asian startup founders, they tend to be like overly humble and they have an issue maybe because the way education system is being structured in Asia, starting from schools, right? When the teacher asked a question, I remember I was looking down on the floor, stupidly thinking that the teacher won't be looking at me.
Yeah.
So right now when I see those founders, especially in Asia, they have to be sort of like lure out to talk about their what they have done. They're very shy and they don't
Yeah.
know how to claim that space. But I think for me it's like, if you have done it, don't be afraid to claim that position or that space, right?
Well, I think that going beyond that, I think you have to be able to do two things. One, a lot of times when I'm coaching or doing these communications workshops, I now position them as, effective corporate communications and media handling skills, because increasingly a lot of the folks that we're talking to won't be doing, quote, media. They're not going to be talking to Bloomberg specifically,
Yep.
but they're going to be appearing on programs like this. They're going to be appearing in front of various, capital markets influencers. And they're going to have to be answering questions like, this will never work, will it? There's no real business case here, is there? And they've got to be able to do two things. One, not be immediately taken aback by that.
Yep.
But a lot of times they'll ask me things like, Ray, can you teach me to be more confident? And my response to that every single time is, I can't teach you confidence. That's something from within. What I can do is introduce you to a mindset that I call the alpha mindset, or the winning mindset. And that's really about understanding why you're doing this. And there is a reason. And then working with that person to understand, based around their business and their offer, what the story is, and then being able to respond to those tough questions in the context of that story. If they're just answering questions, then yeah, it's like being in court and, being a witness. They're just, they're never going to break through with that. And maybe they might meet somebody who feels sorry for them and goes, you know what? But you shouldn't really make your audience work that hard to understand you. You should be able to understand them and immediately tap into what motivates them, what triggers their fears or hopes, and be able to offer something that helps to alleviate their risk mitigation. That's what your whole story should be about if you're in the sort of space that we're in right now.
I read one of your articles, and one of you mentioned like there are three mistakes that CEOs, whether they're in corporate or startups, they these are the common mistakes that they do. One of it is very interesting, especially for startup founders, right? They, of course, when you want to give a speech, you want to pitch, you tend to look at, replay of other great speeches and all this, right? And then you say, oh, I think I can talk like Jack Ma or Elon Musk. And then you try to imitate the way they talk and all this. Now, do you think this is something that probably will work in the opposite, it's like you're trying to imitate someone. The most you can do is be second because that guy already occupied the space, right?
Well, I would look at it a slightly different way. If you have a pain and you go to the internet and you try to self-diagnose, that could be a big problem. And that's where I'm coming from with that particular mistake. There'll be a lot of people that'll go, I don't really need coaching. I don't really need a training because I'm an experienced CEO and I've come this far. Obviously, I have great communication skills. And they'll look at, like Obama and talking about hope and change, and they'll go, I could do that. And then they start doing it, but they don't have, like I said at the very beginning, that one word story. They don't have an idea of how to get from what the question is to where they want to talk, and what, like, the structure for that and the mindset for that. So it's really like self-diagnosis. Another example would be you look at the stock market and it's up, and you look at the top 20 stocks and you go, I'm going to pick that one. And then the next day it's suspended from trading because you didn't really do a deep dive. And that's where you should consult an investment professional, planning your retirement. It goes on and on and on. Law as well. You don't do your own legal work. What's that old saying? Whoever is their own lawyer has a fool for a client. I think that it's the same where CEOs will spend money on compliance, on legal, on other areas, but they won't consider the idea of investing in a communications counselor or strategist, which is what Epic Communications is all about, because they're like, well, I can do that, or we have a marketing person, or there'll be an excuse. And I think that not being able to communicate and having a structure to communicate are very different. It's the difference between the baby going, wah, and the baby being able to cleverly indicate that they want that bottle by pointing to it, or however, a baby develops those communication skills. You have to do that when you're working in the business world, because you can't just talk about what you want. You have to really look at how to alleviate the fears that are creating the opposition to whatever it is that you're trying to sell, offer, etc.
Well, I certainly believe that in fact everyone should have a coach or a mentor, especially in corporate, right? MNC CEOs. I mean, they handle such a big organization. You're the big boss there, so most of the time, like even marketing campaign, right? Someone who launched a marketing campaign, they themselves will measure the success of the marketing campaign. I mean, like you launch a campaign and you measure your own. They're bound to be blind spots. And then if you're the CEO, then you have a town hall and then you ask everybody, how am I doing? Everybody will say, yeah, good, boss, I like you so much, because, who actually will stand up and say, hey, you suck. So I think it's important for these CEOs to have a neutral party to actually be with them, whether it's managing internal communication or external communication.
Well, that's exactly right. And I think that that's where the role of the communications counselor comes in. I think in the mindset of the CEO, you've got your chief financial officer, and you've got your compliance officer, and you've got your in-house legal counsel. Maybe you've got a communications counsel as well. I work with all of those because, again, they're all involved in things. And one of the things that's involved in a communication strategy as an outsider, as the consigliere, as the counselor, is to really help to align all those things. And I think it's critical, especially in a post-pandemic world, as we're moving into the possibilities now of travel opening up and business starting to slowly open up. You want to be capturing those opportunities early and be able to have a strong post-pandemic story. I worked with a client, very good client, some months back, in helping them in this area because they were involved in sort of an insurance function. And what they were doing was everybody in various offices was speaking to clients, and they were having trouble to kind of align the message. And I really kind of worked with them to take all their ideas and structure them into a very simple story that they could use to reassure clients, which was what their goal at the time was, and talk about what they were doing so that they weren't talking about 50 different things and answering questions and having absolutely no control over the story, to being able to identify what those parts of the story were, align them through the different functions or different markets, and then look at how to tap into what the motivations of the clients or the customers would be, and then move forward on that. And I think that that's really what CEOs today, especially in startups, need to be thinking about, is how do I take a much more active role in our communication strategy? And the first thing would be to, again, work with an outsider or a firm like mine to have a workshop to identify what those are, get everybody from the various different functions in the room, I've done this with law firms as well, where you get different practice areas and everybody's talking about different things, but the law firm is trying to kind of think like, what is our offer really about? And, you know, you've got a practice area here and you got a practice area here and you got a criminal and this and that. And everybody's like trying to sell their own ideas rather than thinking like, what is our offer really about to our clients? Who are we targeting? And what are some of the examples that the various practice areas offer in order to support that story?
I have a question, and this is also one of the reasons why we sort of started Asia CEO, you know, some years back. You know, there were many corporate professional CEOs and you know, high level corporate executives, and we tend to know them, you know, or we tend to think of them because they represent a Intel, Microsoft, and, you know, blah blah blah, right? So, and we have to face it. Corporate world it pays very good, but it has no emotion. So especially some firms, right? You perform, there you go. But, you know, if things get tough, you get the biggest paycheck the first thing you go. So most of our friends, you know, found themselves the CEOs who have dedicated their lives in you know, working for this particular bank for 20 years or this particular company for 30 years, and suddenly they found themselves in a situation, and because they were so passionate about this company, right? So, you know, and we have seen, I'm sure you have seen, like, you know, people in their 50s, they suddenly you know, sort of drop from a corporate world. Now, they have been building their personality based or attached to that company, right?
Right.
And once you take Rina out of, let's say, Intel, she's no longer Intel. So, how do you actually, you know, I mean, do you, while working for these big firms, how do you then build a personality for yourself, like, you know, a brand for yourself? Or you shouldn't be doing that, and
Yeah.
you should do that only after you are dropped from the company? I mean, this is some of the questions that my friends were asking, and it caused some depression in them as well, because suddenly you are someone, and then the next thing you know, without carrying that name card, you are like nobody.
Yeah, I think that this is a phenomena that you're seeing now, especially in professional services in the wake of COVID, where a lot of
Yes.
professional services firms have been forced to lay off or downsize. And then you've got this, you know, person who was a consultant somehow or a lawyer somehow, or involved in some practice area, and suddenly that practice area disappears, and they're thinking, okay, well, I'm going to hang out my shingle.
Mm-hmm.
This is very similar, I think, to what I did in terms of, you know, after, you know, almost 19 years working for agencies, I decided that this was now a time to kind of branch out and do something on my own. And I used all of the skills that I had been coaching clients on. I found that as a really interesting challenge to develop my own business. And I did have mentors, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. But the idea was, again, to take that idea of like getting a business name. And I had to think, like, what would it be? And I was thinking all these cute names. And I thought, Epic. Epic is one word. It sums up my approach to communications. It sums up storytelling. It sums up my entire career, if I really want to position it that way. And I think that building on that was to take a lot of the experiences that I had as a visual storyteller, as a broadcast journalist, all the crisis skills, all the training skills, all the experiences across Asia. And I'd worked in all these different markets, all the way from, and I'm just thinking like from like Bangladesh and Pakistan, all the way to like Korea and China. So from developing to more developed markets. And then using all those skills, one word story, what is Epic about? You have to really kind of look at it, because you're now approaching clients and they're thinking like, why should I hire like the small guy when I can get this global agency? Partnering with people, I think, was another thing that I had to look at. Finding ways to position my expertise through media, and talking about it even through forums like this, are really important. A lot of people go, oh, I can't do this, or I'm too shy. Well, they won't even know what to say in a forum like this. And this sort of very friendly opportunity that you've offered to talk about what I'm doing. I'm honored. I'd rather kind of talk more about how I can help clients than just my own story. But in some ways, it's one and the same. How I started my own business is how I counsel clients to start their own, or to position their own, or to reposition their own businesses. Again, thinking about how to tell that story in one word, capsulizing your offer, targeting it to the right people, using various channels and platforms to be able to tell that story in a concise way. All those things I think that I was involved in, I adopted, and now I counsel my clients in. It's a story I think that has, it comes full circle for me. But I think if anyone's watching this and thinks, well, could I do that? The answer is yes. But I think if you are uncomfortable doing it, then get help, get support, get somebody who can guide you along the way, whether that's big or small. And that's the joy of a firm like mine. I make these professional services in communications planning and crisis planning and C-Suite Counsel more accessible.
Well, I think this is the key word here is, ask for help. Don't be shy to ask for help, because I think I guess the startups, the young ones, they are, they're not that shy, but I feel that some, like CEOs, they are a bit shy to ask for help. But I think, if you know that you can't do it, don't even try to Google and do that self-help thing, for things that you need professional
self-diagnosis.
Yes,
no,
exactly.
Bad idea. You would never do it for a medical problem. You would never do it for a legal problem. You shouldn't do it when it comes to how to position your business. And I think that the other part of what I would stress is, not only do you have to identify that there is a genuine need for communications counsel, perhaps outside counsel, because you may have a marketing person or a communications person, but you have to be prepared to invest. This is an investment in your brand or in your planning. And again, being in this position that I'm in, I understand that there's costs involved. And I try to work with my clients to make those services much more accessible to them by describing it, making it less scary. The whole idea of what is a communications firm, what is a PR firm, what is a strategic communications firm is scary. They don't really understand it. But I sit down with them and I kind of break it down into what it is that we'll do. And it's really about taking all of your ideas, structuring them, and helping you to communicate them in a much more structured way to the venture capitalists, to the banks, to the money people, or to your own internal audiences, whoever you're trying to influence.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think, it is an investment. I think it is something worth investing, because if you can buy a Rolex and put in your wrist to actually show that you represent something or you belong to the affluent class, and you do not invest in yourself, where communication is probably the most important thing, right? I can look at you unless you don't speak, but once you open your mouth and it doesn't really match with everything external about you, I think that's a mismatch.
Yeah.
And most of the time, we only have one chance when we meet someone, right? We got to be realistic sometimes, because everybody is so busy and in a crowd, in a cocktail, how you use that one word versus the other person who had lots of noises. Who do I remember? So I think it's a very interesting sort of angle that you actually shared with us today, and I really like that that you said one word story pays dividend. It never come across to me, because I think we thought the more I speak, the more impressed you are, right? But actually, one word. It gives that person, the one that listens, room to think, because it's not too much
it's
information.
not only that. I think it's also being focused and confident. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The one word story, but then also backed up by you have to back that story up with key examples of your offer. So again, back to my best practices, the story of Epic Communications is the idea of structure, accessibility, and expertise. And then the proof points are the various clients that I've worked with, the various things that I've done. One of the more interesting things that I did for a client was after we held one of our crisis workshops. So basically, I should talk about to kind of demystify what it is that I do. Again, the first offer is around the idea of crisis planning. So crisis planning development, crisis workshops, managing crisis. I have a very good program that in a very short time takes large groups or small groups of executive teams and helps them to understand, works them through a lot of different situations, and helps the company to identify where the holes are in their crisis infrastructure. The second offer that I have is in the area of communications and media handling. So that includes presentation skills, media handling skills, message and story development. And the third area is ongoing counsel. So that, I think, often takes the form of being on call, being in a kind of retainer situation where you offer accessibility to your opinion. A lot of times the clients will call me up and go, I'm preparing for this. What do you think? Or what do you think of this? Or we just received this call. How should I manage it? That would be part of a kind of ongoing situation. And again, offering that in a much more flexible or accessible way is what I'm trying to do. So that, I think, in a nutshell, would be how you as the CEO or the communications person could really tap into a smaller boutique firm like my own to support whatever you're doing.
Yeah, because I think everyone is moving towards, the flexibility in terms of everything. When I need it, just there in time, right time at the right price, because gone are those days that most companies have big budget, but more so I think working with boutique firms gives you more flexibility and more either faster response time. I actually love to support boutique firms because they are so enthusiastic versus you go to those big four, big fives, even accounting firms, and they're like, okay, you're one of my clients, so I'm not really that important. But I think it's interesting. We wish we have more time with you, but definitely we could definitely look into how we can perhaps run workshops for our members who need this kind of service, because every day we are faced with crisis. We need to tell stories, and that's one of the really a concern for most C-suites. So Ray, thank you so much for spending your 30 minutes with us. I'm sure our members will get to know you more intimately, and we definitely look forward to having you maybe do a workshop for us in future when things are getting better. So thank you so much again, and chat to you soon.
Thank you so much for having me. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and do get in touch if you want to talk more.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much,
Ray.
Ray.
Goodbye.
Thank you so much, Rina.
Have a great day.